Hi, good evening. Welcome to our panel discussion tonight on racism and racial healing in Hartford. My name is Takesha Dewan Everett, and I'm the Executive Director of Health Equity Solutions. And I'm joined here this evening with a dynamic panel to discuss racism in Hartford. I want to start by giving a few ground rules about the evening. First off, if you're watching this now, regardless of what platform you are on, if you have any troubles, please know that this is currently being broadcasted and recorded by our partners at Hartford Public Access. We're currently streaming live on Facebook through the Hartford Public Access TV website at HPA-TV.org. If you happen to have any problems on an internet-based, we can also be caught on channel 96. And just in case any of that doesn't work for you tonight, this will be on YouTube later for you to catch. If you haven't already, you can look at our previous series that we recorded last week that started the discussion on race and discrimination on YouTube. Tonight we'll be together from 6 o'clock to 8 p.m. And to respect the panelists' time, I have the tough job of being the moderator timekeeper. So I'm going to do my best to facilitate moving us through all of the discussion. Now, what's fun is we have a mixture of faith leaders and community leaders here with us tonight. Now, why do I say that's fun? Because every single one of them in their day life talks a lot. So it's going to be a really tough job to make sure that we're all heard and that we all have an opportunity to be heard tonight and that we move the conversation right along. So enough of you all hearing from me. Let's hear from our panelists. First, we're going to have introductions and welcome remarks from the Council President, Mally Rosado. Mally, you can unmute yourself and take the line.
Thank you, Dr. Everett, and thank you everyone who's on this panel. To the public who's watching us, thank you for joining us. Like Dr. Everett said, my name is Mally Rosado, and I am the Council President for the City of Hartford. It's an honor to be here with you all today and to spend the next 2 hours talking about racism and healing. So back to you, Dr. Everett. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, each person, I'm going to have them introduce themselves first by telling you their name, second, their organization or their place of worship, and then lastly, what they are most excited about talking about, most excited about this conversation tonight. I am going to promise each of you 1 minute, and I'm going to do my best to try to keep you all to that 1 minute. So let's see how this starts. The fun begins. I'm going to go by who I see first on my screen, and that's Reverend McCluster. You can unmute yourself if you are muted and start with your introduction.
Sure. My name is Carl McCluster. I'm the senior pastor at Shiloh Baptist Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I'm also the managing director for a group called Freedom, Faith Restoration, Empowerment, and Economic Development Outreach Ministries that does capacity building around several areas: housing, economic development, sustainability, and education for houses of worship for faith communities and for municipalities. I'm excited about really digging into how we move into systemic change, because without systemic change, racism persists. That's the rock foundation it's built upon. So I'm excited to be a part of the panel. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to this discussion.
Oh, awesome. Way to lead the way. Next, we have Mr. Crawford. Mr. Crawford, if you could unmute your line and introduce yourself.
Yes, good evening. My name is Eric Crawford. I'm the Managing Director of Craig Family Resource Center. I'm also a community member, activist, whatever you want to call me. What I'm most excited about is having an opportunity to hear from the other panelists and also looking for ways that we could keep this energy going and try to get more and more young people involved in this movement. So I'm excited about just hearing the creative ideas and maybe I'll learn a few things today. So appreciate you guys having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here with us this evening. Next, I see Bishop Torres. So I'll turn it to you, Bishop Torres.
Good evening. I'm Bishop Torres, Jeremiah Torres from House of Restoration Church on Main Street in Hartford. And I'm excited to be here tonight and be able to be part of a conversation that's long due. And I hope that as we put our heads together and our minds together, we could be helpful for many others to start our healing process. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we have a dynamic duo, a two pair that I want to have them introduce themselves together. Why I'm doing that, you'll hear in just a moment. We have a wonderful opportunity to have someone who's one of our young youth leaders working with us on this panel tonight, and I'm so excited. So first, I'm going to turn to Jackie and then have Jackie introduce Angie. Jackie, you're on mute, so if you could unmute yourself, that'd be awesome.
Wonderful, thank you. I am going to start a little bit in an unconventional manner because I'm going to introduce myself like this. I'm the Black girl that speaks Spanish and talks white, but in actuality, I'm the CEO at Compass Youth Collaborative, a human relations commissioner interested in equality, a mother to a Black and Puerto Rican son, sister to a brown police officer, an Afro-Latina born into poverty who is now dedicated to making a difference in the lives of young people in the city of Hartford. My team and I help youth to navigate obstacles and provide them with opportunities and lead them to things like quality education. I believe that all youth can flourish and if they're given the right opportunities. And with that, we have the perfect example. Angie Cruz is one of our youth, and I will have her introduce herself. Angie, unmute yourself.
Hi guys, my name is Angie Cruz. I'm 15 years old. I go to Buckley High School, and I'm glad to be able to speak with all you guys today. And what most excites me about this call is being able to talk to all you guys and also being able to be heard as a youth.
Thank you, Angie, and thank you, Jackie. Well, I have to say, I'm excited about everybody being here, but I'm really excited, Angie, that you're joining us, particularly as someone who I see as our current present as well as our future. Moving right along, the next person I want to turn the mic over to is Reverend Dr. Bailey. If you could unmute yourself and tell us why you are excited to be, who you are and why you're excited to be here tonight.
Hi, I'm Michael David Bailey, co-pastor of the First Cathedral. I'm excited to be here to learn from your brilliant minds. Each of you are so brilliant. And so it's an honor to sit here and speak collectively and collaboratively with one another and be able to reconcile the differences that our communities have. And I would sum it up, if I can say one more thing before my 1 minute is up, to one word that I'm excited about, and it's change. So thank you for including me in the conversation.
Thank you so much for being here. Iran.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. Just want to first say to everyone that I'm blessed to be in your space. And although I cannot give you a hug at the moment, I will give you a virtual hug and just say how thankful and blessed I am to be around, like my brother just mentioned, with such brilliant minds. I'm excited to be here because I think that there are many conversations that are going to lead to action. And this is one of the many that are happening. It feels different, and I'm glad that I'm able to play a small role in being a leader to our generations to come.
Thank you so much. And I want to check and see, did Deb Davis get a chance to join us?
She has not yet.
Okay, and I don't think I missed anybody, but did I miss anybody? Just to make sure. All right. So Deb may be joining us later, and if she does, we'll make sure that she has an opportunity to introduce herself. But wait a minute, I just have to say, wonderful job, panelists. You did that under time. So we're going to be so on time. I'm expecting great things from you all. So for everyone who's watching, you know, we're in a different context now and everything is virtual. So I'm making sure that I'm doing two things simultaneously. During the introductions, it gave me an opportunity to really hear whose mic I need to ask who to adjust. So really quickly before we get into the meat of our discussion tonight, I'm going to make sure to highlight Angie, when you unmute yourself and speak, I need you to get a little bit closer to your mic because I think what you have to say is so important. We want to make sure the listeners hear us. And Eric, you did a move on me. So I need to make sure that you can give me a little bit more light so that we can make sure the listeners and viewers can see you. And with that, I think everybody else seems to be right on point. And if there's any problems, I'm going to do like this, which means I can't hear you, and that probably means our listeners can't. So, once more time, as a reminder, tonight we're coming together to talk about racism and racial healing in Hartford. Each one of you have mentioned tonight that you're excited to hear from each other and learn from each other, and I'm really excited to learn with you all as well. So, I just want to go ahead and jump right into the heart of the conversation. What I first want to talk to you all about, or have you all talk about, is racism and its effects. But we can't really talk about something if we don't define it and make sure that we're all on the same page. The way this is going to go is I'm not going to call on any one particular person, but I've got a feeling somebody on here has a statement that they want to make to the following question. How is racism different than discrimination?
I'll jump in.
Right.
Racism is the foundation of discrimination. Racism gives a platform and gives a fertile bed for discrimination to be the byproduct of. When people are affected by racism, then they practice discrimination. That's how I would describe it. They go hand in hand, but really, you discriminate because you have some sort of tendency or sense of someone being inferior or yourself being superior to someone for some reason. And when it's racism breeds discrimination.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anyone have something they want to add to that?
I will. Oh, go ahead.
I think, Jackie, that's you.
Okay, so I would just add to that there's power in the discrimination factor. I think oftentimes we talk about the fact that oh, so and so is a racist because they have they don't like a certain person or a certain individual. Well, because of their race. Well, it's not just the dislike or the feeling of superiority. It's having the power to act on that. So if you have the power to deny someone an opportunity, then that's where the issue lies and where it becomes a little more dangerous in terms of your power to act on that.
Thank you.
Well,
Anyone else?
I'll follow that up with I think that racism in many instances becomes what we call the unconscious bias, and it's really that mindset that someone coming in has a perceived way of being, a perceived way of acting. I'll give you an example. One of the many things that people can say that's truly racist is, well, that person is Asian, so therefore they must be good at math. Or that person can leap and jump high, they must be African American. Or that person carries a knife in their pocket, so they must be Puerto Rican. Or they know how to fix cars, or they must be Puerto Rican. And these are stereotypes, right, and biases that are formed due to a discriminatory background in your education and what you've been trained to understand about those cultures and those people that eventually leads you to discriminate against them. And it leads to other things. It leads to other factors of unemployment and all that. And I know we'll get into that later on, but discrimination is really that feeling of someone being superior to you. And then therefore, based on how they feel about your race or your ethnic background, that you're going to perform a certain way. So therefore they'll go with their own race because that race has been known to perform better than yours.
If I can join in, and I'll be very brief, I promise you.
All good.
I've heard this many years ago, and I'll requote it today. That is, discrimination is racism made real. And I think that sums it up in so many facets. I'm finished.
All right. Discrimination is racism made real. And Eric, I think you were trying to get in and say something else related to this.
My issue with the two, I posed this question to a friend of mine earlier today, and we talked a little bit about it, and we're just on the same page as Mr. McCluster. Sorry. We're going to say, so how do you distinguish between the two? Because one is the byproduct from the other. So I think in our society, how do one recognize they being discriminated against? What signs and symptoms are there you somebody's being racist against you? So we got to figure out what's the real signs and symptoms of that. And secondly, hold people accountable for their actions. And I think that's what's one of the biggest issues that we have when we're talking about racism and discrimination. How do we hold people accountable? Because it's sometimes it's hard to read.
All right. So we have we have a number of comments, all of them theming together that racism and discrimination are hand in hand. And one is the byproduct of the other. A nice quote that we can take away is a good soundbite that we can have as a nugget that we can think on is discrimination is racism made real. Let's talk about who is affected and who's impacted. So who's affected the most by racism, and why do you say whoever your answer is?
I think Black and brown people obviously is affected through it. Everything from our educational system to our criminal justice system to just about any system that allow us to stay at a certain level. And we've gotten so accustomed to it. People have taught us, conditioned us to, just learn how to deal with it. Just the way it is, just deal with it. They never taught us how to change it. They never put things in place in our school systems and any other type of systems. How do you really change? They just teach us how do you deal with it, how do you get around it, how do you survive with it. And I think today we should come out of this with some type of plan on how do we change this. We're tired of dealing with this. 400 years of dealing with this. We're tired of dealing with this. We need change agents. We need different ways of doing different things. Our politics today can't be the politics of yesterday. We got to hold politicians accountable, and we got to hold ourselves accountable for trying to make a change.
All right. Anyone else have a different answer? Who's affected the most and why? Because I don't want to belabor it. I mean, that was very comprehensive. But Idan, I see you're coming off mute.
Well, I think that historically, obviously, is people of color, African American, indigenous individuals, and it's kind of trickled down to other races depending on what's going on. Because racism and the fact that individuals see themselves as superior can be the judgment that people begin to cast on other people that don't look like them or they feel are insecure. So just take a look at all the factors and all of the conditions that eventually they see in us that lead us to not being able to function accordingly. And it's not because of our own doing, but if you look at the fact that the socioeconomic situation that racism has unfortunately cast on us, if you look at the educational system and how many of the laws and systematic racist laws have impacted our young people. If you look at the housing discrimination laws, if you look at all of those things and you bundle them all together, you're looking at people of color. Just systematically, every single generation of African American, Latino, and brown people has had to face some level of discrimination. So obviously, it's impacting us at a greater rate than anybody else. Mass incarceration, you name it. All of those things are the impacts of racism and prejudice and stereotypes and bias. All of those things coupled into one are the impacts, and that's what impacts the most.
I would also like to add to that, only to say that I agree with both of the gentlemen, and then want to say that yes, people of color, Black men in particular, are being killed in our streets, are being discriminated at greater rates, and I want to put a plug in for Black and brown women. I think that Black and brown women, especially in their careers, are discriminated against significantly in that we have achieved higher education levels and are paid very significantly less than males for the same positions. And few of us hold CEO positions, as you can tell by the Forbes 500 companies the Fortune 500 companies will reflect that. With only 24 women in seats of power as CEOs. So I think that's really important to acknowledge that if you drill down a little bit more, you see more of the discrimination against women like us. And so I would also like to toss it over to Angie, because Angie has a really unique perspective on youth as well.
I think that most youth that are, it's not even like a race, it's just like you, it could be a youth that's white but just has a different skin color, can get bullied just because of their skin color or because of the way they dress. They will call them like white. Like if a black say a brown female was to dress in a certain way, that is like called white dressing. They would get called white for it.
Yeah, I can agree with you, Angie, in that when I went to school in my introduction, I talked about the Black girl that speaks Spanish and talks white, because no one could ever point a finger on me when I was younger. Even now, people always try to figure out, what is she? What is she really? You know, that's like the biggest topic of conversation to everybody, because I have darker skin and coarser hair. And so when they hear me speaking, they say that I speak like a white girl. Why is that? Why is that you know, Angie's talking about you dress a certain way, people ridicule you. If you have more education, they ridicule you because it's not possible for us as people of color to speak intelligently. Actually went to a seminar not too long ago and spoke, and someone came up to me afterwards, a very affluent community, and said, I was so surprised at how well you spoke. Those microaggressions, they are terrible, and our kids are facing them too. So thank you, Angie, for highlighting that.
So
Yeah.
I'd like to
add
jump
something.
in. I'm sorry, Bishop.
Thank
Go on.
When I look at racism, I believe racism to me is an attitude, when discrimination is more the treatment. So it's very hard to define which group gets more discriminated than other, because you have to be, it depends on what kind of an atmosphere you're in. So unfortunately, here in America, the manifestation of discrimination has been towards brown and black more than others. But if you look at history in America, a lot of groups that came to America at certain moments, they got discriminated from the country they came from. And unfortunately, today we see that a lot of those communities have merged into the American system, whatever that might be, or however that could be defined, because there's an agenda to Americanize everybody, right? But at the same time, there's an agenda for you not to fit in. So, for example, a person like myself, I was born in Connecticut, but I'm considered a Latino. In Puerto Rico, I'm a gringo. Here in the United States, I'm Latino. I'm a Puerto Rican. So that discrepancy that sometimes happens, it happens because people could have racism in them and never manifest it, while others, through discrimination, they start treating people differently because they don't like their color, they don't like the way they speak, they don't like the way they dress, because they have an image of what they should be within the context of this America. But America is such a melting pot that how can you tell what is to be an American?
Thank you.
So I'd like to jump in there. You know, Bishop Torres shared something with me before that I think is important. You know, we do talk about Black Lives Matter as a part of this racial thing, but you know, from between 2013 and 2019, there are 1,900 black men and women, but also 1,600 brown men and women who've died at the hands of police. And so that's not that far off if you think about it. And while we normally think of black and brown people as the victims, I want to steal a piece from Dr. King and make sure that we understand that while we are the targeted, that the victims are the victim is America. The victim is the world. America, because of all of the opportunity cost that's lost, of all of the talent that's suppressed, of all of the gain that we could have, all the competition that we could, high level of competition in the global workplace, or efficiency in our own workplaces because we choose the best. You know, that's why blacks and browns were able to play sports, because the sports owners decided, you know what, I'm tired of losing. I'd rather be able to get me a couple of those dark people and play better. than without. That's why these sports stars are almost Teflon in this case, because if they can perform, if they can do the job, then it puts them at a different level. And so the team was losing. The teams were losing because they didn't have blacks and browns. They got blacks and browns, and they began to win more. The more they won, the more other people started to get, other owners got blacks and browns. The same thing would be true in industry. If we were able to rise above our own racism and the implication of discrimination and prejudice that's a byproduct of that. And then America, who, as many people say, is planning itself around the world. The reason the world is rising up against America right now, against this, is because we've told them that we had equity, and our victories and our progress was all because we were, the home of the free and the land of the brave, because, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, even though we've said that, then they see that it's been built on the backs of black and brown people. And by suppressing black and brown people and unfairly reverse discrimination, then giving favor to people who aren't black and brown. So I say the most victimized are black and brown people, but the biggest loss is in the American economy, in the American industrial complex, in the social crippling of our children, of our young people, because they've been taught this. That's why this generation is rising up, because they did not have the same sort of prejudices implied upon them, because they had exposure to one another, and having been exposed to one another, they saw that it was not true what was being said from their parents. Talked to a guy today, told me that he was a worker up in I won't say what city he's from because his family might be watching, but he said that his kids are telling him a different story. So the victim, yes, we're victimized, but the greatest victim is our economy. The greatest victim is the social price we pay from suppressing the best talents and abilities coming forward in America.
Thank you. That was so well said. So one thing I want to do, I saw Mally's hand saying she wanted to get in here. I want to take a second, Mally, to introduce Deb if I can, and then bring
That's
you
exactly
in.
why I wanted to interject for a minute. Go ahead.
We're on the same page. Well, so I want to remind our listeners tonight, we're together. The panel is discussing racism and racial healing in Hartford. You can catch this Facebook streaming live on HPA-TV.org or Channel 96 if you're watching on television. Tonight, we have a wonderful dynamic panel, and I want to give Deb Davis an opportunity to introduce yourself, the organization you're with, and one thing you're excited about having this conversation with us tonight. So Deb, if you're on mute, you can unmute yourself and you have the mic. Uh-oh, Deb? Oh no. So Deb, if you're talking, we don't hear you.
I'm going to see if I can get her through the phone because obviously she's having technical difficulties.
Okay.
Yes, I was going to say this is Deb's daughter. She was telling me she's having technical difficulties.
Okay. So whenever Deb, whenever you can be heard or whenever you think you can figure it out, just chime in no matter who's talking. Let's just make sure that you hear that we hear you. We recognize your presence, that you're with us. And we're so glad that you're here with us tonight. I'll just say really quickly, Deb is from Mothers United Against Violence, and she'll have an opportunity. I'm sure we'll figure this out. But as everyone knows, being in this virtual world, we have to make do the best we can. So I think I saw Iran unmuting himself when we were just having this conversation about who's impacted and affected. So I want to go ahead and give you that opportunity to respond.
I just wanted to follow up briefly on the last comment made and the impact, the psychological impact of everything he said has had on our communities. You talk about being able to overcome all of those challenges, but the psychological impact for those that are on here that have done social work, youth development, just take it, reflect on your work and see the impact and share the impact that you've seen that of the systemic structures that exist on our young people. It is devastating to watch. As a former first responder and supporter of folks that responded to incidents of violence in Hartford, I saw it firsthand. The psychological impact is so deep in so many communities that they find it very difficult to climb out of all these systems. And then you couple that with the fact that the barriers are real. We're not making those up. And so young people in particular, and I would love to hear this young lady speak on this. find it more and more difficult to be able to embrace success when psychologically you're destroyed. I was watching Shades of America earlier today just to kind of get a insight on how the KKK operate with their children, and they have schools dedicated to training their young boys and girls on how to continue the legacy of the KKK. So the psychological impact on those children is similar to the psychological impact on our children, because we're being pre-exposed to violence, gunshots, poverty, you name it, and then they expect them to succeed at a high rate with all of those challenges. The same could be said about young children that are being trained to hate blacks and people of color. They have no chance to think otherwise or be different, because that's what they're being taught. In many of our instances, you see the systems being in place in the educational system and all the other systems that are present, teaching us by way of poverty and redlining and all of that, that we belong to that melting pot of violence and all of that. So therefore, we become that in many instances. So the battle has to continue in order for that psychological impact to be lessened, so our young people can start seeing differently.
May I chime in?
Come on in here. Yeah.
I think one thing to highlight what Brother Iran is saying too is it's a byproduct of learned behavior. And there's some things within the community that we have to unlearn. And in this regard, when I think about the African Americans experience, right? My parents are from Memphis, Tennessee, and they were born in the 40s. They saw broken homes, but that stuff stemmed from generations beyond that. So being able to reclaim history, or be able to reclaim the family and basically change the systemic learned behavior, change uh, what's going on in society. Because I think some of the stuff that has happened historically is now, again, history repeating itself. Whether you're from America or not, I can only imagine. I was talking to Bishop Torres some time ago, and Bishop was telling me, again, what he shared, but more in detail about his experience and how it has bleeded over into America. And again, Dr. McCluster talked a little bit about it. He pointed out what Bishop shared with us about the 1,600 um, uh, brown folks who were killed by the police, right? I would not have been made aware of that if he hadn't told me, number one. Number two, Bishop said something that really enlightened me. He said in his community, people don't speak up. And it also uh, made me think about my community in this regard. The right people don't speak up. Or those who have those experiences, when they don't speak up, and doesn't help with the, and forgive me for such a crazy idea, but if folks would speak up and, talk more about historically what has happened, maybe it will cause, especially with young people, to embrace a normal that causes them to achieve even more. I was thinking about it, and I'm not as verbose, but it just made me think. But I was thinking about when I was in sixth grade, there was one guy that left a lasting impact on my life. He's actually a professor at Central Connecticut State University. Don't ask me how he became a sixth grade teacher. I don't know if he got in trouble or anything like that. Pray not. But one of the things was he had us reading the works of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois at such a young age, and it left such a lasting impact as far as how we to go ahead. What is our trajectory supposed to be like? Otherwise, if we don't pay attention to history, we will allow it to be repeated, and we are not to stand for being repeated. We're to speak out. We are to be the collective conscience to the community. All right. Council President wants me to close my mouth. Sorry.
No, continue. I just want to be next. It's very, very interesting what you're saying. Go right ahead.
I am of respecting my authority. So, if you raise your hand, I will stop. So that's just the truth. But just thinking about those lessons, and then learning about Jim Crow law from my parents in Memphis, and learning about how they had to drink from colored water fountains and go to colored restrooms, and they had to eat from the back, and learning all those type of lessons, it helped us. I will not say that even on the reverse side, that there are some things I don't think about as much as probably white people have a reluctance to deal with me. I think sometimes, there may be reluctance shared in dealing with them, not knowing what to expect. But I think somebody else, I think she was joining the line, the person that you asked to speak. So I want to close my mouth.
I think so. Deb?
Hi, this is Debra. How are you?
Wonderful, Debra. How are you?
Oh, good. So good to be here. And thank you so much. I haven't been listening to everything, and but I did want to thank the Councilwoman for sure for basically asking me to be a part of this conversation. And so I'm here.
Excellent, Debra. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for persisting. And thank you, Council President, for persisting to make sure she gets on. This is what it's all about. Working together, we can get things done. And I think that's a wonderful theme that we're going to have over and over again throughout this. So we're glad that you're here. You came in right at a good point. We're still in the beginning of our conversation. For our listeners, that is a reminder, racism and racial healing in Hartford are what we're talking about tonight. And we're currently discussing who's affected the most by racism and why. And we're going to move away from this and pick up on some of the themes you all have come forth with saying so far. And I'm going to ask you a different question.
Takesha?
Yeah.
Can I just want to add one very short note. And,
Okay.
when we talk about, and I want to pick up on what Dr. Bailey was saying, when we talk about, black on black crime or brown on brown crime, we often are blaming the victim, because if we believe what we are taught in school, which is devoid of African American, African, and Latino, Hispanic American heritage, then we are taught that we are less. And so we begin to believe what we are taught. We believe that we are less. And so we value our own lives less. And that's a lesson that's taught by the systematic racism and discrimination that has persisted for a long time. So what would you expect from someone if you've taught them that the person like them is worth less than the person that's policing them, or the person that's governing them, or the person that owns the businesses around them? If they are less, then they are not doing as much damage to society by killing each other as they would be by killing one of these other people. And I just want to make sure we understand education has such a great role in that. So that whole idea of, those bad black people out there, those bad brown people out there just waiting for the opportunity. We're taught to do that. And if we believe the lessons we're taught, then that's what we do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, can I say one more thing about that?
Well,
I will shut up, I promise.
Hold on, Mally she was in there for a second, but she went off camera for a second, so I gave her a moment. But we have to let her have the floor, but I'm gonna come right back to you, Doctor. Go ahead, Councilwoman.
Thank you. So sometimes when I talk to people, I like to share personal experiences, because I found as growing up as a woman of color, I would keep a lot of things inside and make certain decisions. And then I kind of regretted them afterwards when I would sit down with a group of women and have conversations and know that I was not the only one and that it wasn't such a big deal. So going back to when I was young, at 6 years old, my father decided to give us a better life and relocate us to upstate New York, Syracuse. And so when we were leaving Puerto Rico at 6, the kids would say, "Oh, you don't want to go over there. You're going to be like an Oreo cookie inside of a milk carton. And the kids, all the white kids are going to be really mean to you. You need to stay. You can't go." And I would tell my friends, "Fine, I have to go with my parents." So long story short, I got to upstate New York. And when I walked into the classroom, for sure, I was I call myself the only black child in there, right? Of school of 200 or 300 kids. So I was always waiting for someone to bully me or to be racist. And I have to tell you that I never felt that in that community. I stayed over their homes. I was treated equally. So growing up until I was about the age of 11, I never felt racism because I wasn't involved in that. when I went to Puerto Rico and came back here and had my first job in corporate America is when, as an adult, I started experiencing it, but it was very difficult for me to accept it, even though I was seeing it. And so I had to work harder than other people. I got passed on promotions. So it was very difficult for me as a human being to go through that. And here I am today where I see it, right? And I lived it. Even when I was I was going through the council president, I had even people of color call me and say, do you think you can handle that? Women, what are you going to do with your kids? And, I had to put a stop to it and say, well, first of all, my daughter is 31. And the only thing at home is my husband and the dog died. So I have plenty of time to do this job and do it very well. But how do we stand up to it, right? How do we stand up when we're being discriminated? Because we can sit at a panel, we can have discussions, but if we don't take action, if we don't stand for ourselves, and then there's the other thing. Well, that person is being discriminated. You're seeing it, but I'm not going to fight anybody's battle. Like, as society, how do we move forward? How do we handle things? I'm done.
I'm going to say, Dr. Michael, how do we handle it?
Yes. I can't answer that. That's a large.
That's not what you want to answer?
No, I would say one thing that I would join in. This is so funny. So I'm glad I submitted to Madam President. I didn't want her to get me on the line. But the thing about it is, I think one aspect, it's not the end all be all, but that's having what I call a village education, right? You're learning about your culture. You're learning, but you're learning from maybe from what we identify people as sages, right? You're learning all as far as like history. I think that's one aspect of it. I think one of the things I loved about what Madam President talked about, she talked about her experiences coming from Puerto Rico, which is different from America. You see what I'm saying? But those lessons that turned into life lessons that were instilled in her, she was able to identify later on along the journey. So I think that's one aspect. Again, the second thing, like I don't want to repeat myself. Another thing would be to, again, you talk about change. Those who are aware, right, don't sit there silently. Speak up. Be able to speak when people really are, I don't know, I don't want to say people are voiceless. Sometimes I don't like using that term.
Yeah.
But people lack a voice or lack a prominent voice when you have a voice at the table. And I think thirdly, when you're talking about change, and this is why I thank the Lord for Madam President, she's at the table. You put key people at the table, people who can make change. Because if you don't have people at the table, change will not happen. Otherwise, it'll be the same group. It'll be a homogeneous group making the same choices, the same decisions, and change will not happen. I'm finished.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. I see
So I'd
Jackie
like to-
coming in here.
Yes. There's so many things that I can really talk about, but I want to leave some room for others to chime in here. Couldn't agree more with Dr. Bailey about being at the table. And I think I speak from a point of equity as well. I think I've had the privilege of being an Afro-Latina born into poverty, raised in the projects in Massachusetts, and basically had an opportunity, got lucky, to go to a private school, win a scholarship and go to a private school that changed my life because of education. Because 15 minutes in a world away, there was a higher quality education than I had ever dreamed about. I had always prided myself on being an A student in my public school in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And when I went to that school, I started to fail instantly. And I discovered that the quality of instruction and teachers that I received at my public schools was not enough for me to compete at any level. It took me years before I could actually compete with others in that arena. And so I always say that education is one of the ways out of poverty. Education not only about your race and ethnicity, your own history, but also education that instills self-love within one another. And lastly, I would like to say that we need to be able to change the power dynamics and the systems that have kept us oppressed for so long. When you think about the youth or Black on Black crime or brown on brown crime that was just spoken about earlier, if you think about the fact that people have a survival mentality in some of these places because we're competing for the small crumbs that are left for us at an education, in work, in all of these places, and poor housing conditions, and you're put in a place where your system, where your primal system in your brain is constantly on alert, saying survive, survive, survive. You're not thinking about thriving at that point, right? You're just thinking about how you're going to get your next meal and all of those things. So if we were to do one thing, I would say we need to begin to be at those tables so that we can make changes in housing, so that we can make changes in education, so that we can make changes and in workplaces, so that our kids can have an opportunity to thrive and compete at the same level with others, so that we're not thinking about surviving, we're actually thriving.
Can I chime in?
Okay, yep, and then after that, I think maybe Deborah was trying to say something, so I'm gonna go to.
Yeah, I was, but I'll wait. I'll wait until he's complete.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
All I was going to say too, one other piece is economics. I think that is a stirring factor for America. And unless we have conversations about economics, when money is pulled away from one community, it makes drastic change. And I think one of the things we have to do is start to look at where we're going to pool all of our money. What money are we going to pour into? What are we going to what are we going to do with our economics, excuse me, and how are we going to function economically? I think about as far as my community, and I do think about the Brown community too, is how can we better encourage people, not only just Black and Brown folks, to patron Black and Brown businesses, but white people. They need to patron our businesses. We have products, goods, and services just like they have, but I think it's important. If there's going to be change, we have to, even now, encourage them, especially with what's going on with all this racial tension. Start patronizing us, start donating. This is great, but the same energy that you're giving now, 10 years later, please give that same energy because it's necessary.
That's awesome. Okay, Deborah, you're gonna have the last word on this, and then I'm gonna switch to a different question.
Okay, so my initial thoughts is sort of a combination of everything that's been discussed and talked about. It includes both the economic level, the educational level, everything, health, everything that you can think of, because they're all layers that have been in existence for years and years. And I believe that the systemic racism is innate in every aspect of those layers. And I think, and I know for a fact that the eradication of them is almost impossible. But I believe at this point, because there's been it's almost like and if you describe a volcano waiting to erupt and explode, because there has been so much, I would say, just not even paying attention. These people have totally avoided, and they have lived subliminally in this entire environment, not noticing and recognizing the importance of a people, Black, Brown, because this has been for so long. So I have to say that in order to really begin to eradicate and to show some kinds of signs of hope for some of our folks who live at a primal state. I want to be honest here, and they're all about survival. And so we talk about it in the sense of a real world. This is a real world. Some of us understand it. Some of us have lived it. Some of us know from what we've heard. But I believe that it is time now for us to really move in at the level of making certain that this time frame, because it's almost evolving to me because of the historical aspects of it. Seems like we've gone 401 years, but we've gone back so far. So I believe that it is time for us to lean in, and this is the timing, at the right time, at the right level, so that we can absolutely help to make, not because it's not going to be total change, but it would make a difference for our next generations coming forth. And so that was my sentiments on that, because it is a combination thereof, and there's so many layers that have been there that it's been very difficult to penetrate.
This is such a great conversation, and I could talk to you all for hours. I mean, really, I could, because each of you bring a different nuance, another piece to the puzzle that all comes together. We're talking about racism and racial healing in Hartford, and right now we're specifically talking about racism. And a couple of the things that have been said so far from the different panelists. Education is key. It's really easy to other people and to discriminate against people when you don't learn about a people and you don't have information about a people. When in Connecticut, one of the most segregated states in the nation, when you can live in an entire area where you don't get to interface with different people who don't look like you. Now, that's not the case for us in Hartford. Hartford is an 85% majority people of color city. So co-location is really key. You can interface with and interact with everybody every day. If you don't, it's in a way you're choosing to not do that. However, we are all multiple generations on this call. Now, we're not calling out ages. Some of us are in the same generation. Some of us some of us might be looking closer to Angie's age than we really are, because we've got that lovely, delicious skin. But we all have different generations here. And what we've heard in many of your comments tonight is to break the cycle, to really do what the council president is asking us. What do we need to do to change? To break the cycle, we have to address the generational effects of racism. So why don't we, in the last part of this segment around racism, take a moment and tell me, what are your thoughts about the generational effects of racism? And how do we break them? Like, I mean, I really want to go back to that action-oriented, because the council president is always going to bring us right back to the action. What are the effects and how do we break that cycle?
So look, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to jump in really quickly, because I'm always talking about generational aspects with Mothers United Against Violence, and how we try to make certain that our young people know that they do not have to be in the same state of mind as their older brothers and sisters, and they do not have to repeat, because sometimes this is what they see, the repetitiveness. So generational racism is easy. It's so easy for individuals to succumb to, because they don't know any different. And I believe a lot of that comes from the educational aspect of it. The educational aspect of it, not just at home, but it also is at school. And one of the things that we talk about is how they are individuals that are supposed to be living as if they were little princesses or little prince. You know, they're special. And I talk about them from the perspective even of Africa and the other continent, and how we have seen pictures of different types of individuals, but individuals that absolutely look like us and are great. And have a great rites of passage. And that's one of the things that we've gotten away from, the rites of passage, and how these individuals need to hold on to that. And that is, I believe, is so important as we start to teach our Black and brown young individuals how important, and their value, their self-worth is so important, that this cannot be. How can we help to break that generational cycle? But what they see is what they think they should be. And this is part of that entire cycle that we have to start to really lean in on at another level, and not just talk about it, but lean in on, because we get to the B students, we get to the C students, but we never catch those students that are failing. We tend to let them go in that little loophole, and they are lost. That becomes our next generation for our community.
Thank you. Bishop Torres, you were going to say something there too.
Yes, I got a few things to say.
All right, let's do it.
First, when we're talking about generational things, it is important that we realize, for example, a young woman who got violated at a young age is going to develop a personality around that, is going to develop conduct around that, etc. But then she'll have a child, and the child will manifest the same pains or the same reactions that the mother had without experiencing the actual situation. And I think this is going on in America. A lot of the younger generation are manifesting the pains of their parents, but they really didn't go through the same experiences that their parents went through. I wanted to point that out. The second thing I wanted to point out is talking about Hartford, and I love Hartford. I'm committed to Hartford. I think it's a great city, and that's because all of us are in it. But let's look at something very interesting. We have a 38.7% population of African American in Hartford. But we only have 12% in the police department. We have 43.4% population of Latinos. We have 20% in the police department. We have 15.8% of whites in population in Hartford. We have 66% police. So something is wrong in the way that we're dealing with this. And I think our generations need to know that they can aspire, that they can grow, that they can achieve. And I think there's something very important. My high school counselor told me that I wasn't college material. I wish she was alive today so that she could see what I was able to achieve, because I had a father at home that said to me, you can do whatever you can be. And as long as you want to study, you have a father that's going to support you. So there's a family structure also that's very important. But I want to thank God for my church, because we have faithful years here today. I want to thank God for you know why? Because my leadership didn't start as a bishop. I started as the president of the children's ministry. So my first sermon, I was a little boy, and the church gave me the opportunity to develop as a leader. And that helped me to then develop as a leader in the world. But church has played such a key role to helping generations know that they can achieve. When a church tells a child that's 7 or 8 years old that he could be the president of the children's ministry, and then, at 15, they hand you a Bible and say, you're going to preach on a Wednesday night. And then they say you could be the president of the youth ministry, and then they can say you can be a deacon and all this. You're a young person, but they're giving you opportunities. I think that when you are able to see how important, and I'm just going to say it because I know I'm probably going to be politically incorrect, but that's not the first time that I would do that, right? So that's why I believe churches are essential, because we are a key component to society, because we have been able to develop leadership within our congregations starting at a young age. So these kids, when they go out of the churches, they can conquer the world because somebody's believing in them and giving them opportunity, developing leadership. So I think there's a combination of faith. I think there's a combination of a home life. If you have a dad and a mom, your chances to survive and to excel are going to be much greater. And that's a factor in our communities, Black and brown. One parent household. And we know the stats on that and on what happens when one of the parents is missing. So when we combine all these things, I think it's important that we push, yes, on education, but we also acknowledge the people that are in the background helping things to happen, like churches and parents that do an excellent job telling their children, don't worry what they told you on the street. In this house, you're going to succeed. You're going to be great. And I think that's a combination that is well needed in our community.
Thank you, Bishop. And that was so well said. Oh, Mally, were you talking? I'm sorry.
Yes, I just wanted, something just came to my mind, and I see Angie's screen, and I just had a quick question for Angie, because I feel so honored that she took the time to be on this panel. And yeah, can you hear me? Angie?
Angie, you might be on mute, Angie. There we go.
Hi. So I just had this quick question that I thought about, and I wanted to ask you. You said you go to Buckley?
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you a quick question. And if you don't feel comfortable answering, it's okay. We could have this conversation offline. What year are you in Buckley?
2022.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. What resources do you think that you could tell this panel that you don't have right now that would be able, if you had them, would be able to help you achieve your goals? If you could pick 3 right now.
If I could pick 3,
Yes. Resources that could be available to you that you don't have that would make you achieve your goals.
well, in Buckley, there's a lot of like in a lot of the classrooms, there's like a lot of noise where kids can't really focus, and more mentors I feel like will help, and more technology because we only get Chromebooks, and when we get the Chromebooks they don't really like explain anything. They just give us the Chromebooks and tell us to do the work. And I don't know another one.
Okay, I'm pretty sure you could think of some other ones. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Dr.
Well, it's so interesting that you went to Angie, because I feel like, so for those who are watching and who are on the panel, it would almost seem like Mally and I are one at the hip, because my last question in this segment was going to be to Angie, and I'm still going to do it because I think it's important when we're talking about generational effects of racism that we speak to the generation of now and the generation of our future. So Angie, you're going to be the last word in this segment. I want you to talk a little bit about how you see racism perpetuated in social media and in pop culture. Because that's the thing we know right now we have such access to. So Jackie, Angie, why don't you tell me what your thoughts are related to that, and then we'll transition to the next part of our session.
Angie and I actually had a good conversation about this, so I'll take it away, Angie.
Okay, there was this one artist that I had listened to a song, and his song was the name of the song is The Bigger Picture by Little Baby. And there was a quote that really stuck with me about racism and about the whole George Floyd issue. And the quote is, "I find it crazy the police shoot and you know that and know that you dead, but still tell you to freeze. I seen what I seen. I guess that means hold him down if he say he can't breathe."
And tell us what you thought about that and why that was so powerful to you, Angie. Why is music powerful to you guys?
Music is powerful to youth because there's a lot of artists that explains what we go through, and even though we really can't talk about what we like, it's harder for us to talk about what we go through because we feel like people don't really hear us because we're youth. And so when we listen to the music, they're basically telling us like what we go through, and to us it helps us feel better.
Thank you, Angie. I think I
Can I
think
just
that's
add
such a
to that?
powerful. Oh, go ahead, Eric. Yep.
One thing we're missing in this conversation is what space are we providing for these kids?
Yeah.
We all know schools condition us. Sometimes I just think sometimes, just through my experience, school is whitewashed. You know, they've got me conditioned to the abnorm becomes the norm. That type of mentality. I've never had an opportunity to go to someone and look like me to discuss when someone made me feel less than the person sitting next to me or going to school with. And it still exists. I think a lot of our educational institutions, there is institutional racism. So how do we deal with that? How do these kids do that? What space are we providing? A lot of them, they turn to social media. That's their space. And if you follow some of these kids and listen to some of these kids, the real talented ones, if you hear through their music, they're crying out for someone to talk to. Other than our churches, kids really don't have a place to really turn to and really talk about racism. If a teacher says some things to them, they go to the principal discounts it most of the time because he doesn't want to get into a conflicted situation with the teacher. So what are we going to do about trying to provide that space inside and outside the school for these kids? Because
I
again,
think
it is their generation.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful segue into answering that question and moving from the discussion about what is racism and how do we see it to the question of how do we heal from it and how do we heal together through it. And I think what I'm hearing you say, Eric, and correct me if I'm wrong, and also what I heard Angie say is we need outlets, and we have different kinds of outlets that are available to us. Angie highlighted for us for the youth, it's hard for them to speak, so they have music and they hear the sounds of young artists and different artists who are expressing through word and through sound what they're feeling, so they feel like they're not alone and they're not isolated. And what Eric is challenging us to say is, well, where are we and how are we creating the space for healing for the youth and to give them an area to speak up and talk about it? So, how do we do that? What are the ways in which we can promote healing and self care in our youth and in ourselves specifically as it relates to the impact that we are all experiencing around racism?
So one of the ways is stop not codifying, faith. Faith has been thrown under the bus. I mean, there's several faith leaders and people who have faith backgrounds who would tell the story, as Bishop Torres told, of the role that the church played in his in building confidence and coming to become himself. And we talk about generational things, then it's a great segue because what faith talks about a lot is these generational curses that are passed on from one generation to the other generation. And for one, I'm just, I'll be plain. I'm tired of people telling me that there's something wrong with exercising my faith, or for my children to exercise their faith. The absence of faith is in many ways led to a generation of what is hopelessness. And we want to promote everything else. We want to promote everyone. We can promote all the different agendas, but we don't want to even hear or give space for the faith agenda. This whole generational curse that begins with a lesser education in our large cities, Hartford, Bridgeport, New Haven, Waterbury, in the highest per capita income state in the nation, and we have in the 40s in terms of performance out of the 50 states in our schools. That's inexcusable. And the refusal of state legislators to address the funding formula because of racism that exists in some of the outward towns. It's not about we're going to share and make this thing better. And so we get kids fed to the prison pipeline, the prison industrial complex that makes money because people are working there for literally free, for pennies on the dollar. But the products that are being sold by those that own those privatized prisons and making millions of dollars for people, farms, fish farms in Colorado, for example, that workers are working there for less than $1 an hour, but their fish is being sold, for whatever bucks a pound when they're produced. It's amazing. Education leads to lower opportunities, leads to lower employment options and money, and creates a poverty cycle that is generational. And I believe that the opening of, if we're going to open up the schools, if we're going to open education to everything else, then we need to open it up for faith too, because there's a track record in faith schools and schools based in faith that have been performance oriented that outshines any of the schools that exist right now in the state of Connecticut. So I want to put my hand in that pot and say, come on, why are we suppressing faith? Why are we saying that there's something wrong with expressing our faith? Why are we teaching our children when we have on money that we're messing with? It says, in God we trust. What's up with that?
All right, okay. Y'all getting spicy in the second half of this already. We're starting off on a spicy, okay. Iran, do you have something you want to add to this? How can we move towards a state of healing and self-care on the issues related to racism and how it impacts in ourselves and our society and our communities?
Well, first, thank you for all the powerful commentary. I mean, I'm learning so much. I have maybe 5 pages of notes So as it was said before, we have some brilliant minds here that are giving me. My light keeps going in and out because I'm in my office, so it's a little black. It's the sensor light. But so for me, I think you know, the platforms that we're setting up, and I think this is one of the moments where we have been awakened to look at things in a much more deeper way. Prior to this, we were so occupied with doing work and doing all of that. And when we were frozen by COVID, and this unfortunately happened to Mr. George Floyd, there were millions of eyes that finally were able to see, including our young people. You have to remember that our young people were watching. And even though we weren't watching in many instances what our young people were doing, they were watching us and they saw that. And this galvanized them to start marching and protesting and asking for rights and looking at their research and creating their voices, creating channels all over Facebook, all over social media. Young people have begun to use their creativity with technology that sometimes we're outdated in because, we're older and they understand the new ways of communication. Those are some of the things that we're going to have to invest in order for these dialogues to improve. Because the facts are that pop culture, as they call it, right, is one of the strongest vessels that young people are using to generate emotion and empathy, because they're connecting with each other in different worlds, different communities all over the planet. It's not just here in little Hartford. You have young people that feel like they know one another because they share deep emotional pain that they feel at what they witnessed, but then they realize, oh my gosh, I've suffered all of that too, in a sense where I haven't had the best education. I didn't know that that was happening to me. So the awakening of young people is what has triggered a lot of our action. And yes, we have at different levels, we have different individuals that can contribute to what it is that we can do to make some change. But it starts with identifying platforms. So at the Peace Center of Connecticut, I remember a number of conversations. We call them peace conversations. We approach everything from a peace lens, right? How can we get to peace? How can we have peace internally, externally, in communities? So we provide young people a Youth Peace Alliance. Every summer we gather with young people. Well, we don't design the project. The young people design the project, because we know that in order for us to have the impact that we want to have on young people, they have to be the ones that give us the guidance. What we do is we find the funding, right? We find the partnerships, and then we teach them how to do that. But the content, as far as how is driven, what they want to do to give back to the community, what their peers are saying, it has to start with them. And this is why, again, I think that as we continue to lead, whether it's through religion and your youth groups at the church, or whether it's through Compass and their outreach programs, or whether it's Peace Center, or whether it's CREC, or whether it is a number of organizations that are working with young people, we have to start shifting who it is that creates and designs the model programs that we have. It has to be with the impact of the young people, but it also has to start from a place of love and peace. If we say, okay, a young person, you're angry, we're going to let you be angry and be explosively angry. It's different than be saying to a young person, that anger is a beautiful thing. You should be angry. Now, how do we channel that to help you write down what it is that you want to see change, so you're not as angry? How do we change that to making it motivation for you to inspire young people who are unfortunately blinded in some instances by their suffering, to take a pause and channel that anger and that survival instinct to creating the systems that help them to keep them from surviving, having to be on survival mode and to succession succeeding mode. Those, for me, those are the core things that I see as us being able to do to have young people and to start the healing process. The healing process has to start with deep reflection, but also understanding and adding value to the emotion that young people are feeling, that we're feeling. The sense of frustration, the sense of hurt and pain, the sense of loneliness, the sense of isolation. All of those things have to be given value. Now, once they're given value, give tools to the individuals that need to do something in order for them to see the change and be the change that they have, that they want to see in the community. So again, I think it starts with these dialogues. And again, I'm thankful to be here, but I also think it starts with us also reflecting internally about, are we allowing young people to really guide where we go, and are we approaching them with not in a sense of, okay, we are your adults and you listen to us, but no, we love you, and therefore we have something that we can impart on you are you open to listening? Because I'm opening to listening to you, so you can help me help you. That's the conversation. I think that's the platform. That's the approach I think is most effective when we're talking about healing. I'm talking about politics, not talking about anything else. I'm talking about healing. It's about developing strong understanding with each other, strong energy with each other, and strong love for each other. I think that's one of the remedies that we need to have.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. And I know that a key part of our discussion, and this is the second time that I've worked with Council President Rosado, it's really about that healing and about that action and about change. So I'm going to go to you next, and then I'm going to have Eric chime in. I got to put a little order out there for us to make sure that we have this. I think Debra has some things. Everybody has a little something they want to say here. So Valley, I'm going to give the floor to you, and then I'm going to go to Eric next.
You know what, Takesha? I am going to yield my time. I'll be last. I want to hear what everyone has to say.
I love it. All right. So Eric, you put the call out there to us on this question, so we're going to put it right back to you.
Well, in terms of healing,
Yes.
I think, being a older gentleman, I'm probably the oldest person on this panel. We got to have an ear for these kids and these young kids. I think we got to be a little bit patient with them, and we have to definitely get into some of these educational institutions to make sure the support is there during the course of the day. I mean, our kids are in school, for some of them, more than they're at home. So some school districts are really raising our kids and educating them at the same time. Unfortunately, that's what it is for some households. So what we have to do is, like Aaron just mentioned, we have to listen to them and develop support systems around what their needs really are, and listen to them and seeing if we're really feeding these kids and what they need educationally, social, and emotionally. Because they're dealing with a lot of trauma on a daily basis. And if we don't tend to that, we're not going to go anywhere.
Great. All right. Thank you. So I'm going to go to Debra. And as just a reminder for our listeners, people may have just tuned in. We're talking about racism and healing in Hartford. And right now we're talking about the healing part of this conversation. Debra, if you're on mute, you can take yourself off and you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Well, I love the word healing. And when I think about healing, I think about community. And so one of the things that came to mind was a lot of young folks have, and this is just different generations, generational X, there's so many different generations, but some generational folks are totally oblivious to what's going on around them. They were awakened by what's going on through the historical aspect. And they weren't looking at it through lenses that we all look through sometimes on the traditional side. And so they were shocked into reality because most of the times it was somewhat about them. And we had to yield the floor to them because that is what it was. And then we have another generation that absolutely wanted to hold on to, I call it the big mama love. And so the big mama love comes through the community. And it shines through the community as part of a faith-based effort as well. But it also helps to grow that young person into who that person should be, he or she should be. And it develops them and enhances them. So part of my whole piece as it relates to finding the resolve and the healing aspect, it has to actually start at the home and with the family, and then which expands into the community, which is really what I call, of course, and I think you've heard it before, the village. And so with that, I totally believe that child or that person has to have that special love, that unconditional love that we know who gets, that unconditional love that helps them move from one level to the next and not stifles them or not putting them in a generational trek. And I understand the generational trek because we deal with that every day. But I also understand that there is another way. There is certainly another way, and there's certainly another outlet. And that big mama love, that community love, that love from the family, that love that expands into the village, and that love that expands beyond where that person is actually thinking, can take that person from one level to the next. And it does take a whole village. It does take a city. It does take part of us, of our insides to come out, as opposed to thinking on a selfish kind of a note. We have to start thinking about how we could be more inclusive with the community. Sometimes when we move, and I use this as an example, when we move out of the city, we move to different aspects, we totally forget what that community is actually going through and what those children are dealing with, as one person said, on the trauma level on a day-to-day basis. They live in trauma. They work in trauma. They walk to school in trauma. And then they have to come home in trauma. And they still have to deal with so many aspects. So I believe that it's going to take more than just that big mama. It's going to take more than just that community. It's going to take more than just the city. It's going to take more of us to be able to come in and to basically make sure and certain that this child also has an opportunity for survival, educational-wise, health-wise, everything that you can think of. And so my thought is that it's all-encompassing. And I'm going to yield the floor because I could talk a little longer, and I won't.
No, that was beautiful. And I think this is the part where everybody's going to have a lot to say. So I'm going to free flow it by calling on the next person. And you notice I'm being a little bit more liberal with time, because this is the section we wanted to make sure we get to and have a rich and robust discussion about moving into that healing portion. So next, I'm going to call on Bishop Torres.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I think one of the things that help us to heal is, first of all, recognize who you are and celebrate who you are. There's a reason why your last name is Rosado, your last name is Nazario. It's not Nazario, it's Nazario. There's a reason why your last name is Cluster or Bailey. And we don't need to apologize for who we are. And I think we have to teach the generations that are coming up to be proud of who they are, be proud of your color, be proud of your heritage. I think we've lost that. And I think that when you realize who you are and you celebrate who you are, you walk out of your door every morning knowing who you are. It doesn't matter what somebody else tells you, as long as you believe in yourself and you believe who you are. So in saying that, you know, we have this awesome celebration in December in our church. We have over 12 cultures in our church, and we do a celebration of people dressing like they would dress in their countries, and then we do what we call a tour of nations, where they all bring the different foods from those nations. And one of the reasons that I started this activity is because I wanted to make sure that the younger generations would understand culture, would understand why they are who they are, and that they don't need to become something else in order to fit in. And I think if America would appreciate the awesomeness of so many cultures coming together, we were all made from one blood. So I think that we need to teach our younger generation to celebrate who we are. And I think too many people apologize for who they are. I think in apologizing, you're never going to heal. You're never going to reach the expectations that someone else put on you. So if you want to heal, you got to believe in yourself. You got to love your color. You got to love your last name. You got to love who you are, and then live life under that perspective that you know who you are. And it doesn't matter if somebody else doesn't like your color, doesn't like what you are. You are sure of yourself. Obviously, that's a process, and you need people, like many have said, around you to support that idea that we should be proud. There's no reason anybody should apologize because they're Black. There's no reason anybody should apologize because they're brown. We are unique, but we're also part of something greater. And I think the beauty of humanity is how different we are, and yet how different how equal we are. If you go to the doctor, we all have red blood at the end of the day. That's what gives us life, right? So I think, just to reemphasize my point, I think it's very important that we are proud of who we are. And I think part of the problem of this nation is that they try to indoctrinate people to become something else. And you hear that a lot. You have to be white in order to fit in. No, you can continue to be Hispanic, you continue to be Black American and celebrate your culture and celebrate your food and do what you have to do, but then also know that you're part of a nation that you have to incorporate yourself to and be part of it. But I hope that we would stop this apology tour and accept who we are. Thank you.
That's awesome. I think I'm having a little bit of technical. Oh no, there I am. I'm back. Okay, that was great. I just wanted to make sure you know I'm here and I can see you all and I'm listening. So I think I'm supposed to go to Jackie next. I think that's who I saw raise their hand next. So Jackie, the floor is yours. How do we heal?
Thank you, Dr. Torres. I think what he just said touched my heart so much because instantly I became aware of a situation with a child who came into my office in tears. I mean, crying hysterically because a Latina had told her that she was African. And at first glance, I was like, why is she crying about that? And she said, I'm not African, I'm not. And I was like, she's dark skinned, had the coarse hair, and myself, just putting myself in a vulnerable position, said, I have some African heritage too, and I'm Latina. In fact, 40% of me comes from Africa. I said, and so I described that. I described the fact that, as a Puerto Rican, we also have Taino Indian, and 11% comes from there. And then I have a part that comes from Spain. And so, I described that to them and said, and I'm proud of that. And I said, and maybe if you know where your history is, then you'll be able to love that too. And it didn't help right away. It's kind of like it took some time over time. But what I realized was exactly what Dr. Torres said, that somehow down the line, she got the message that that was bad, and that she couldn't love a part of herself for that. And that breaks my heart because somehow we've given that message to our kids. And so when I do my work at Compass, I'm all about making sure that we're giving love and mentorship. Not the love that comes with firmness because, the one that has to be like, 3 strikes and you're out. There's a 0 tolerance policy here. We're not going to put up with your stuff. We're going to say, no matter how long it takes for you to heal from all that has happened to you, not what's wrong with you, all that has happened to you, we will be here to guide you through that process because that's a hard place to be in and do that by yourself. Together, we're working with kids on creating educational goals because their voice matters to us. And we're creating unconventional opportunities for kids to learn. So many times we're scripting how kids have to learn. It has to be this way and that way, rather than giving kids hands-on opportunities. Or why not even use music to teach? They're using it. They love it. They love social media. Why are we so archaic in the way that we're trying to reach our kids and trying to put them into these, check off the box so that, they comply with the rules that we've set in place that sometimes don't even make sense? We need to have these courageous conversations. And we at Compass use restorative circles, no matter where we are, whether it's to heal a conflict or whether it's to just create a relationship that's built on trust. We are asking questions to find out who you are. Who are you really? And so any question could be happening. It could be, what are your values? What's important to you? Because we want to get to know the person and build trust before we're automatically trying to solve a problem or tell you what rules you should be following, right? So I think we have to be able to think about education and the way to engage kids so that they can have this healing process come alive. And I'll just leave it with the last piece because Angie blew my mind today when we were talking about the music, because I was thinking, music these days, I feel like an old woman. It has all of these swears and all of these, things. And I'm like, I remember back in the day when we had self-destruction and we had KRS-One talking about, stop the violence and all this other stuff. Where is all that stuff? And she really talked to me about it is healing and it's speaking to what we are facing these days. And it brought me to the work that we're doing around brain, the brain development. if you think about your favorite song, sometimes it'll transport you right to the spot where you were at. You could probably smell the food that was in that space. Like, it's such a play, it's such a attraction, right? You remember all of those things because it's connecting with all of the emotions that happen to you when you listen to those songs, right? And it's opening a part of your emotion that you never have access to. So we need to be accessing our kids this way. We need to be healing in this way and not be afraid to take the back seat to the kids sometimes. That's it.
That's lovely. All right. I was like, wait a minute, is somebody playing self-destruction? What just happened? Okay, because I was over here in my head, like bopping, and I stopped for a second. Oh no, we're not in church. I can do that.
Lyrics. Crazy.
We can do it tonight now. Both of us, we can knock it out.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Thank you. So, Dr. Bailey, I think you wanted to chime in about this conversation we're having around healing.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I started singing self-destruction when she said that earlier too. I was up there, self-destruction. Yeah, I mean, it started hitting me. But I think I don't want to repeat what everybody has been saying. But and everybody has said some of the most brilliant things. I think one thing, one aspect, if I could throw it out there, is identifying absent roles and the village fulfilling those roles. Or whomever, as Sister Cruz said earlier about the young people particularly needing mentors, and be able to do that. And something that kept coming up in my mind is like the necessity of churches, since I'm involved in the church, but also accountability. If having that open communication, that if there's a lack of relationship with your community, to speak up, and churches be open, leadership be open to correct it and give back to the communities. And again, going back, I guess if I would boil it down, reaffirming who we are in the community, right? Reaffirming. I think it's so beautiful, particularly what Bishop said, Jacqueline has said also, that having that reaffirmation makes the world a difference. Knowing that you are somebody today can go a long way. That's it.
All right, we're just getting deeper and deeper as we go. Started off deep, we're going deeper and deeper. I think I have Carl McCluster coming on next for me. You're on mute, sir. If you could unmute yourself. Thank you. Uh-oh. No, there we go.
Oh, there we are. So, when we start talking about healing, then people have different approaches to healing. At least my observation is that there's either a prescriptive approach or there's a preventive approach. And I've heard different ideas that contain both of those things, but I don't think it's an either or, it's a both and. And the reason I say that is if you look at COVID, for example, and what we're going through right now. With COVID, we both have to protect ourselves from being infected, but also treat ourselves if we are infected, right? Take measurement to see if we're infected, and if so, then take the medicine that's necessary for that. And that's part of the challenge, I think, that we have to bring these different resources together in order to try to make a difference and to make things happen. When we there's not going to be healing if we don't address the systemic issue. And I think that's the one thing that I hope people will leave this call with tonight, was the idea that for all that we do to fix what's wrong, if we don't stop the wrong from occurring, then we'll just continue to be swimming upstream and allowing the things that have been happening, the systemic racism, to be addressed. I applaud what I hear from the city council chair in Hartford. It is unlike what I hear from city council chairs in many other cities. And that is a direct approach to things like the contract that protects, police that do wrong and makes good cops look bad because there's not the ability to discipline them the same way that citizens are disciplined when they do things that are wrong. And so again, for all the fixing we do, it's like I had a little leak in my in my hose, and so I closed off as much as I could where the water was coming from, but I didn't close off the hole, and so it just kept leaking and leaking and leaking. And we just keep reinfecting ourselves unless we deal with systemic issues. So I applaud all the efforts for prescriptive stuff. I applaud all the things that lead to healing because we address people where they are. But when are we going to stop the entry of people into that system because we allow the system to pollute people as they come in? At birth, people are ostracized. In every system of our education, people are ostracized. At every level of employment, people are ostracized. It goes on and on and on. And so, unless we address the root cause, which is the systemic racism that's built into our society and that's perpetuated by the institutions of our society, education, healthcare, all of it is there, and it's documented. So it's not the judiciary, the prosecutors. And why do black and brown men, boys, girls, women get a different charge for the same crime? Why do they have a different sentencing? A good friend of mine, one of my fellow alumni at the Colorado College where I went to undergraduate school in Colorado Springs, Colorado, was the judge, Ray Jones. And Judge Jones was participated in a blind study of judges that had more than 150 judges that saw more than 500 cases rotated through them over the course of a period of days. And clearly, what was marked is that judges were judging people of color with the same facts differently than they were people that were not people of color. And so, again, I could say it 50 different ways, but I think I've made my point. I pray I have, that unless we address the systemic challenges, then we're not going to resolve this. We're just going to keep kicking it down the road, kicking it down the road. How many people have to die for that to happen?
Thank you. So I'm just going to feedback. I don't think I need to because I think we all heard it. But what I'm taking away from that is we need to be prospective, we need to be responsive, but we also need to be systematic in looking at the system in and of itself, because healing the system helps heal the individual. So if we only go through individual approaches, we're continually creating and reproducing that healing in a system that's still broken. That's amazing. I mean, I didn't do any justice to the summary, but I just wanted to make sure if anybody came in any part of that they heard what you said, because I think that was so important. I believe Debra wants to add something in here, and then I want to see if Angie has something to say, because we haven't heard from Angie in a while. So that's just to let you know. I'm going to Debra first, and then see if Angie has something to say. So Debra, you have the floor.
Okay.
Oh, did we lose Debra?
Okay, can't. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Now, I was actually thinking just what the gentleman before me spoke, because when I thought about healing in its purest form, I thought about how can we heal without addressing some of those real issues, and that is educational, health, and all of the items with the systemic racism from the very depths of the Jim Crow laws that still exist on the books. And I just wanted to add that we need to start to look at the laws that were created years and years ago and that are still there, that absolutely impact us as individuals of Black and Brown, and they haven't been taken off of the books because no one has been looking at them. But that is part of the layers. And that was really part of my part of just adding to this sense of a healing, because it was so important to address all of the layers that we're living under. And if we don't address them, and if we don't try to eradicate them, we certainly will they'll start to impact us even more, because they'll grow. There'll be more layers. People will be doing well in one end, but there will still be so many people that will be so impacted by those specific laws, Jim Crow laws that are still in the book as it relates to the court system, We work with a lot of young people on a day-to-day basis. They're going in and out of there. It's like a revolving door, but those laws are not for them. And other folks come in there, they get a slap on the hand. They can call their moms, call their dads, and there's so much to this. So, you know, I just wanted to add that we certainly we have to really begin to address some of those issues that have been in existence forever, and we can't move on until they have been addressed. It's just like Nehemiah being on the wall. He said he can't come off the wall until his work is done, and it's never finished. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. All right. So Jackie and Angie, the dynamic pair duo, and in case listeners haven't heard or understand why they're our dynamic pair, Jackie is the CEO of Compass Youth, and Angie is our 15-year-old youth leader that is joining us tonight from Compass Youth. So it's important that we lift up the voices of the youth in this conversation. So Jackie and Angie, do you have anything you want to add here?
I'll let Angie go first, please.
I would like to talk about how I use music to heal me, and I could use music legit to heal anything. Like if I'm in a bad mood, I could just listen to music and I'll be okay. It blocks, to me, I use music to heal me because I don't really know. I feel like it just uplifts my mood, and I could listen to it to go to sleep, to help me if I'm in a bad mood. It uplifts my mood even when I'm happy.
Talk about, you said something very powerful to me earlier about when you're facing struggles and you feel like there's no other outlet, what do?
I would write my problems also. When I write my problems, I would just write about them in poetry.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you. You know, I think I learned a lot from Angie today as she was talking about, you know, how she uses the arts. And I think sometimes in schools, we forget about those things. Music and art are one of the first things that are cut from budgets because they're seen as the soft skills. But I think it's really important that, you know, we are considering that as also a part of our traditional education. So thank you, Angie, for sharing that, because you're not the only youth that says that to me. I also wanted to add something in regards to the healing process as it relates to all of us leaders. I'm truly concerned for leaders of color in Hartford. I believe that we are in the middle of 3 different pandemics all at once. Number one, we've been talking about is racism, but then we have violence that plagues our urban in poor neighborhoods, usually with Black and brown folks. And then we have COVID, you know, and these leaders are showing up, leaders of color are showing up every day and putting on brave faces to go to work and heal the constituents or the people they're working with while they themselves are falling to pieces. So I think it's really important that we are looking for ways to uplift leaders of color during this time. I've even talked about, you know, doing leadership huddles or doing other things that are in support of leaders who are taking a lot on their shoulders right now. So I just wanted to put that out there. I don't have any idea on how it would work, but I know that I am concerned about the healing of people of color leaders in particular.
Thank you for adding that. So we've heard themes about healing and the importance that family play, that faith plays, the importance of community. I think Debra even brought in the role of government and specifically looking at the laws that are on the books that exist now that further kind of further institutionalize and reproduces the racism that we see in our society. Again, I want to go back to this point. I'm going to call on Council President Rosado because the idea of us coming together and having this conversation was born out of her office and the work of her and her team. The point that I just want to come back to you on this last word in this segment is when you kind of came up with this idea of talking about bringing together faith and community leaders around healing. We just got one concrete idea at the end that Jackie said we could do leadership huddles. Can you speak to what this is doing for you as a leader in Hartford to bring people together in this conversation? What is it doing for you? And what is it your goal that it does for the people who are listening to us tonight?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jackie, for those words. A lot of things as a politician, as a leader in Hartford, as council president, sometimes things are very tough because I was having a conversation the other day with someone where people have this, and I'm sorry I'm choking up because sometimes it is a lot. People sometimes look at us as if we are machines, and we're not. We are as human as everyone else. And it's very hard. I'm sorry. Because I think of my life and I think about what people have been going through. And I was a person who grew up not believing in God because I went through so many horrific things. And I always believed that there was always bad and not good. So I had to develop my own faith. And I remember one time I was working and I said, God, please give me the patience. And there was a pastor on the other side. And she walked in and she tapped me and she said, honey, don't ask for patience. You better start asking for strength because God will test you in a way until you develop that strength. And from there on, she said, stop praying and start having conversations with God. So by the age of 43, I developed this huge faith. And not too long ago, I found myself in a situation as a leader where I had this tremendous responsibility. And I found myself for the first time in my life calling on Bishop Torres and having conversations with him and finding myself telling him, could you pray for me? Because it does become very difficult. Today, I called on community leaders at 2:00 and I said to them, we have a terrible problem with speed chases in Hartford. The community is not obeying the traffic rules. Would you support me if I ask the legislation to help us put cameras on traffic lights? Mind you that I had a lot of people that I spoke to in politics saying, you're going to test some waters. People are not going to support you. No one wants cameras. And so as I started to call on the community and community leaders, and I even had a conversation with Eric, everyone was very supportive. And they were like, Mally, Council President, we have your back. We will stand with you. As a community, we have to come together. Hartford belongs to all of us. We are all invested. So what I want to get out of this is for us as a community to come together, to not criticize as much, but become part of the solution and not the problem. We all know the problems that we have. And so I'm for one, I'm pretty much tired of talking. Like there's not anyone on this panel or there's not anyone in this audience that doesn't know what we have to do. There isn't any politician out there that doesn't know what they need to do. We all do. So let's do it. Because if we don't do it now, I don't know where we're going to be in a couple of years. I mean, how many more George Floyds do we have to see? How many more single moms, that have to leave their children at home with the older one having them babysit them and not get the education? We can do better than this. And I'm going to say it myself. I want everyone in the city of Hartford to hold me accountable. And if I'm not doing my job, vote me out and vote someone in. And if they're not doing their job, vote them out. Because you know what? The number, that's where the powers are. Vote. Because if you have a street of 100 people and 5 show up at City Hall wanting a roadblock or something, they're not going to do it. Okay. But if you have 50 or 100 people, okay, you'll have it done the next day. This is how it works. And I'll say it here and I'll say it anywhere. We need to come together as a community. We can't be afraid anymore of getting the political pushback because that is what happens when you want to do the right thing. You'll get the pushback you won't believe. So I decided when I heard that I was going to get a lot of pushback to go back to the community, and everyone has been very supportive of it. So I am going to put in a resolution asking for cameras to be put on traffic lights. I want to be proactive. I don't need anyone else to be killed in Hartford. We have to do better. We have to heal as a community. And for crying out loud, let's be supportive of our police department. We have people in every area. There's bad husbands, there's bad wives, there's bad cops, but we also need to support our police department so that they can go out there and they can do their job. Everyone can do their job if they do it respectfully. So I can continue to sit here and preach, but everyone on the screen, everyone that's viewing us, we all know what we need to do. So let's do it together and let's move Hartford forward. Let's move this state forward. That's all I'm going to say for now.
All right. Thank you, Council President. Okay, so well, in our last 10 minutes, we've been talking tonight about racism and racial healing in Hartford. Such powerful and great words. We've heard about the definition of racism, its impact generationally on what's happening to us. We've talked about moving from just a discussion on the theoretical and the practical understanding of racism to one of healing, and how do we begin to heal, not individually, but together, through our family, through our faith, through our community, and even through our government. How do we begin to do the process of healing? I'm now going to give each panelist 1 minute, and honestly, you probably have more like 30 seconds to give us your final closing remarks that you want to leave the audience with tonight before we close it out. I'm going to start with, I think I'm going to start with Bishop Torres first, and then I'm going to leave Angie to have our last word. So I'm going to call on individuals in between, but if you just want to unmute yourself, that lets me know that you're ready to speak. So Bishop Torres, you're first.
Thank you. And thank you for the audience joining us tonight, and all the panelists. It's been a privilege to serve with you tonight. We need to learn the system, and we need to correct the system. I think there's a lot of lack of knowledge of how the system works. We need to hold our leaders accountable. We need to talk to presidents of unions, especially the police unions. We need changes. We need our legislators to be on top of this. And, we can't let this sleep, because in a few weeks or months, everybody will forget what happened with George Floyd, and we'll go right back to living our lives that we were a few months ago. And I think this is a key time for us to come together, and healing starts with us coming together and learning the system and making sure that the system is working correctly so that we can give our next generation a better Hartford. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Jackie unmuted, and I see Debra unmuted, and I see Carl unmuted. So any one of the three of you want to go next?
Yes, I would say that it takes a personal investment on behalf of all of us to have the courageous conversations, confront racism, but also put our power into action by voting, by having a seat at the table. And as exhausting as it can be to be a leader of color during this time, I don't think we have any other option but to stand up and to fight and to be counted. And so I think that we also have a duty to mentor our youth and make sure that they are provided with options and opportunities to be the leaders that I already know that they are. Let them lead in their way. They have different and unconventional ways, but we'll be okay.
Thank you.
And this is Debra here. I want to thank Council President. I want to thank this has been an incredible conversation, but it also has been an enlightening one. And I'd like to think of this time as an awakening one, where everyone is awakening to a new spirit of living, a new spirit of life. We do have so much of, I believe, the detoxing that we have to do within our own individual races. Whether it be Black or brown. So we have a lot of detoxification that we have to do as a people to help us move to the next level, and also to help the next generations. The first African-American Thurgood Marshall for the Supreme Court. We've had the first Adam Clayton Powell, one of the first congressmen. And if we're wanting to champion more of those type of individuals on, and even with different spirits, we need to be able to recognize the power that we have when we're stronger together as a people, as a unit, not this one or that one, but together. And I think that is so important when we're talking about systemic racism. We're talking about trying to eradicate it. We're talking about trying to make sure that people can look at every side of this. I want to say it's an animal, because it has so many different tentacles that are associated with it. And I said it before: health, education, economics, capitalism, everything that you can think of, the laws on the books with the Jim Crow is still existing. So many different pieces of it. But I know that if we continue to lean in and do what we have to do, we can give our next generation, as we're passing this baton, making sure that they can hold on to it, because there's so much more responsibility with it. I believe we can definitely make a difference. But it's so important for us to understand that we can be stronger together, and that we are more powerful than people absolutely think. And I thank you so much for just having this conversation. It's so key, because we have to start with it ourselves. And I yield the floor.
Thank you, Debra. All right, Carl, you're off mute, so I'm coming to you.
No problem. Systemic racism is really the challenge that we face, and if we're not willing to undo it, then we're not doing anything at all. I want to say to all the young people that are listening, I say that as someone that's over 60 years old, so my kids are in their 20s. And I say this to you. I say that when we came up, we had to ask for permission to take the higher seat, and you guys are just taking it. And I applaud that message. Take it, because it's yours for the taking. Hold them accountable. Hold people accountable. The city council president said, hold us accountable. Then do that. You do that by voting. So while all of the protesting, we've got to register to vote. So this is our process. Prayer and process plus process equals progress. How about that? Prayer and protest plus process equals progress. So pray and vote, protest and vote, engage the process, and vote. Because if you don't do that, then politicians that aren't like the city council president, that have been sitting in the office all this time watching this go on, are afraid to engage the unions and afraid to engage because they're afraid they're going to lose votes, then you need to understand that they will respect you because you'll take the action of voting.
All right, I'm going to have you say that again at the end. Okay. Who haven't I heard from? Iran, I think, and then Eric, and then Dr. Bailey, and then my friend Angie.
First, thank you everyone for enlightening me today. Again, I learned such a great deal from everyone. Thank you, Council President Mali Rosado. I say it right, Mali Rosado. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. I just want to say that recently I started reading the book March, and it's the story of Congressman John Lewis and all of the different times that he was beaten and tortured to make a statement. And the profound statement that he was making is that we together are going to make the impact, whether we die or not, or whether we suffer or not, or whether you want to realize it or not. And little by little, piece by piece, they started dismantling systems that gave up to them. They didn't give up. The system gave up to them. So we have to continue this approach until we make the system give up to us. So this is not going to be only on the shoulders of the congressman and the council folks and the mayor and the governor. It's an approach that has to be aligned with different points of attack. Has to be our young people in schools advocating for greater education and better education. It has to be with organizations that have young people, educating them and guiding them and supporting them. It has to be with demanding additional resources to better support our communities. It has to be with holding our leaders accountable. It has to be with voting. It has to be with writing. 400,000 17-year-olds will be 18 by the time the elections come around. 400,000. So you have the power, you have the numbers, we have your back. And thank you so much for being here today, all of you. I'm so grateful. We have a lot of work to do. We're not done. But if this amazing congressman was able to suffer as much as he did, we should be willing to do the same.
Thank you. Okay, so we have 1 minute left. And I am so upset to shortchange any final speaker. So, Angie, we've already said is going to have our last word. So, Eric and Michael, make it quick.
Just want to say thank you. It's an awesome session, and I just hope we can continue this conversation with the group. I mean, what an amazing group of people. I mean, first time I've ever been exposed to some people on this panel, but I just want young people to understand they're living in a real-time historical time right now. If they're not involved, they're not coming to the table with ideas that's going to really push things forward for them and their generation, they're missing the boat. We got to get these young people to the table. And in terms for us, for our legacies and our ability to give back to Hartford, this is our time. So we must stick together. We must create a leader going to lead us, and we must back them 110%. But I appreciate it, Mally, you allowing me to participate today. Thank you.
I'll make mine very brief. Thank you, Dr. Everett. Thank you, Madam President. Thank each of you. Thank you for allowing me to participate and hold us accountable. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. All right, Angie, the last word is yours, and then I'll close this out.
I feel like youth are the change for the future. I feel like youth should make their voices heard more, and get involved in the community more, help the community, and most importantly, get their education, finish school, and don't let others hurt them for what they say to them. And I would like to say thank you to all of you guys for letting me join this call and for hearing me out.
Well, thank you, Angie. I think you just left us all with the charge, and we applaud you for being with us tonight and taking your time to be with a bunch of old heads, because we're all older than you, and sharing your wisdom with us. We appreciate it. And thank you to all of the panelists tonight. I want to give a special thank you to the Hartford Public Access Television for providing us the platform this evening for our conversation, to Council President Rosado and all of her staff who helped us put this together. And I just want to remind us really briefly as we close out why we came together and where we're going. COVID-19, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Rashad Brooks, and so many, many more. Let their lives not be moments we forget, people we forget. Let all of the ancestors before us, Black, Indigenous, Latino, Asian, and otherwise, who have lost their lives for the fight for our rights and for the fight for us to be here, to make meaning. Let us together end racism. Let us heal. Thank you all tonight for watching. Thank you all for participating. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Thank you.